Greetings everyone, welcome to our show today. It's kind of chilly out here. It's still March, it's the end of March, and this is in BC, Canada. And as you can see around you, there's not much growing at this time. But I want you to step inside and see what you can see here in our greenhouse, to see if anything will interest you. So come on in and see what's happening here. It's good to step out from the cold into the warmth of the greenhouse. I don't know about you folks, but our family loves greens, kales and Swiss chard and things like that. And I just wanted to show you something. Now remember, this is the end of March. I want to uncover this little mini greenhouse that's inside this larger greenhouse. So you've got this larger greenhouse covered with plastic, and then there's a little mini hoop greenhouse. As I uncover this, I want to show you that by the end of March, here in February and March, you can have greens growing like this. Succulent kales and Swiss chard and garlic greens of all kinds. Now typically, you won't have greens like this time of the year in February and March. You start with small plants usually, but these plants are enormous. And so we're going to tell you the secret about how this was done. But before we get into that, we want to show you these succulent greens. These are different varieties. I have about 8 varieties of kale. Lacinato. This is a Russian frills. Here's one called Ragged Jack or Red Russian. There's a curly kale right there. This is a hybrid called K, with a capital K. There's just all kinds. There's a Hunger Gap, one from Siberia. Here's another one that's a purplish kind of a kale, a crinkly kale. Excellent, very succulent, very sweet. The benefit of growing these kales in a greenhouse, this time of the year especially, is because they're so soft and tender, and they're just bursting with flavor and nutrition. And there's a secret how to get to this. But before we get into that secret, we want to step aside over here and go to another little hoop house inside this greenhouse. Now this one, we've got mostly Swiss chard in. And the reason we covered these kales and Swiss chard, this is a frost netting. So we have these little hoops grow here. These hoops are simply water pipe that's 7 feet long. Our beds are 4 feet wide. Then I've got rebar pounded in the ground. Then these are water pipes, regular heavy-duty water pipes, 7 feet long, bent around and put over these rebar pieces in the ground. And so this frost covering, I keep that all winter, because what happens is it helps protect the kale and the Swiss chard and the garlic as it's growing. It won't be growing very much during the winter, but it does keep growing. And once February, March hit, when the sun is out a little longer, as soon as the sun is out, it warms up the greenhouse. These kales and Swiss chard, they just burst out. They enjoy the warmth. Look at the size of these Swiss chards and these kales. And we've been harvesting these now for almost a month and a half already. And the warmer it gets, the more they grow. And you just keep pruning off leaves, the top shoots, because those are seed-bearing shoots, and they're so tender, and they're so succulent, and full of nutrition. And we're going to tell you the secret, how I've come across how to have this size of kales and Swiss chard during the winter and in March. Now in March, they're this size, just amazing. This Swiss chard right here is probably the most common. It's a white Swiss chard. Then we've got the ruby red Swiss chard. We've got a rust colored chard. And yeah, it's all here, and it's easy for you to do this. Very easy. Like I say, typically you have to sow seeds in February or March, transplant it out here in a typical garden, what they do. And then what you have is you have very small plants like these over here. This is typically what it would look like about April or May. And it wouldn't take long and you'd have those eaten up because they're still very young plants. But these, they produce an abundance of healthy greens. Look at the size of these leaves. And what I also do is, what these plants are trying to do, because this is the second year that these are growing, and they'll produce the seed pod. What I do is I snap off these seed pods. And they're so soft, you can eat the entire thing. There's so much nutrition. And if you were to buy these in the store, they're very expensive. And you can just pluck off a few more leaves. And what happens is you break off the seed pod, they're going to start new ones. You can see down here, they're already starting new shoots. So as you pluck off these leaves, as you eat them, in time, those will grow and take the place of these. So it's just continually producing. It's amazing how resilient kale and Swiss chard is. You can just keep eating and eating and eating and picking. And it seems that God has just placed it in nature, in these plants, to be so resilient, just to keep on planting and keep on producing. Look at these bushy ones here. I broke off the seed pod, and see what happened here? This is broken off, and we ate these about a week or two ago, and now look how it's bushed out again. Just incredible greens, and so soft and tender. You can stir fry these. You can use them in soups and stews, or you can make fresh salads out of them. Excellent greens and full of nutrition. Now let me reveal to you the secret how you can have these size of greens in February and March. To get nice succulent greens in February and March of the size you saw in the greenhouse, it begins in the fall, really. In the fall of the year, maybe September, depending upon where you live, October, even into November, before it really gets cold. I take my old plants that I planted outside, like this one right here is an example. I take my old kale and Swiss chard plants and I dig them up. They're very easy to transplant. Like I said, these kales and Swiss chards, they're very resilient. I remove all the bad leaves and I just take this whole thing up just like it is. Roots and all, lots of roots, lots of dirt. The more dirt you can carry with it, that way it'll transplant easier into your garden. So this is what you do, October through November, depending upon how cold it is in your area. Before it really gets cold, you want to transplant your old plants. Now come with me back into another greenhouse. So, we've got our old plant here that I've taken out from outside. I've prepared a deep hole with loose ground in the bottom. And I add some compost, well-rotted manure. You want to make sure it's well-rotted. Add some more soil. Mix it up a little bit. Then carefully transplant the kale into its new home for the winter. And here's another secret. Lots of water. In order for this to transplant well, it needs lots of water. And then I'll water it through the winter, maybe 2 or 3 times every month to make sure it's really saturated with water. And this kale will continue growing throughout the winter, but very slowly. Very slowly, that is, until springtime. Until February, March, the sun comes out, it warms up your greenhouse, and it bursts forth. This is also a 4-foot wide bed, and what I would recommend, like I said before, put your rebar in here. Your rebar is about 16 to 18, 20 inches high. You pound it in the ground, put your pipe over it. Like it is over here. You've got your hoops. This is our 3rd tunnel here of kales and Swiss chards and things. And it's very easy to do. And this is a frost cover that's a little bit heavier. I would recommend the heavier one because temperatures can fall down to really cold and it still won't affect these. And sometimes I almost get discouraged when I do this, because I come in here after a cold day and maybe a cold night, and some of these kales, they look like they've just died because they're flat on the ground. But remember, kale is so resilient. If you've done your work with covering it and you water it, a few days later when I came back, when the sun was shining, the kale didn't miss a beat. It was just right there again. So this is the secret that I found that really works for me, how to have fresh greens early, February, March, to get this height. And look at these succulent greens. I already broke off this top here. And after I've done that, look at all these side shoots that come out. And these are so tender, so juicy and succulent, so nutritious. And another good thing about growing greens this time of the year, there's no bugs. There's very few insects or aphids to trouble you. And so you're able to have all these delicious greens without pesticides and without any problems with the insects and so on. The other thing I've tried to do the same thing with celery. Look at celery. Same thing happens with celery. Transplant the old plants. Look at those nice tender celery shoots. They're so soft, so succulent, just so beautiful. And it's so easy to do, but it takes a little work. Here's a few kale plants that I've broken the growing points off, and they'll soon be bursting out again. I did the same thing here a couple weeks ago, and now look at it. It's just bursting out again with fresh kale. Like I said, it's so resilient. It just gives you so much nice food. And best of all, you didn't have to go to the grocery store to get it. Recently I broke off these tips of this curly kale because I wanted to eat those tips, because those tips are producing seed, and I don't want seed this time of the year. I wanted to grow greens, and so as I broke the tips off, it's going to shoot out side shoots, just like what happened here. Here I broke off the tip a couple weeks ago, and now look at all the new greens that are coming out. These new side shoots, so succulent, so tender, so mild. And it's so easy to do, and the best part about it is you don't have to go to a grocery store to get it. So I hope this is helpful to you, to have an early growing greenhouse with greens in March, February, and all through the winter. And then on into April, you'll just have bursting, your whole greenhouse will be bursting full of greens. And after I'm through with these greens, when we're ready to put tomatoes in here, we'll take these greens out. As they are, I transplant them one more time outside. Now this time I let them grow outside so that they can produce seed. I collect my own seed, especially the kind of kales that I really enjoy, and I collect that seed to plant again in the summer. So I hope this has been helpful for you, and happy gardening, everyone.